Let us start with the next chapter, biodiversity. What is biodiversity? If we break this biodiversity into two parts, that is bio and diversity. Bio means biological. Biological means all living organisms, whether they are fauna, flora, that is animals and vegetation respectively. And diversity means variation or variety or the differences. If we combine all these biological and diversity, it means variety of life on earth. Biodiversity means the variety of life on earth, and life means animals, plants, microbes. The variety of life means their habitat, their genes and their ecosystem. So each and every aspect of life on earth is known as biodiversity. Now biodiversity, importance of biodiversity, because it is the foundation of life on earth and it is crucial for the functioning of ecosystem. Now let us discuss what is ecosystem. Ecosystem, basically it is the biological community of interacting organisms. Here the interacting organisms are fauna, flora, microbes, all living organisms with their physical environment. Physical environment means non-living things. So the importance of ecosystem, that it provides habitat to wild plants and animals. It also supports different food chains and food webs. You must be knowing about the food chains and food webs in your previous class. And ecosystem also provides recycling of nutrients between biotic, that is living, and abiotic, that is non-living components. Ecosystem is the interaction between living and non-living components, that is biotic and abiotic components. Now this term biodiversity is given by Raymond F. Dashman in 1968. Students, you are very much familiar with the definition of biodiversity, and you also know what is a species, and you also know the concept of ecosystem and genetic. Genetic means the genetic constitution, that is, we'll talk about the genes. So biodiversity, that is the variation in fauna and flora, is divided into three kinds. That is, there are three types of biodiversity. First is the species biodiversity. Species biodiversity, you know that species is the basic unit of classification, where group of similar organisms are kept together and they are capable of exchanging their genetic material, that is, they are capable of interbreeding. Now species biodiversity refers to the variation of the genes. Genes store information and they are responsible for the variation or the differences within the species. One example is there, Homo sapiens, which is a common name for human being. Homo is genus and sapien is a species. So sapien, Homo sapiens, they belong to the species sapien and they are capable of interbreeding. Second type of biodiversity is ecosystem biodiversity. So you know the concept of ecosystem. So ecosystem is the biological community of interchanging organisms where abiotic and biotic factors, they interact with each other. So ecosystem biodiversity, it refers to the different kinds of ecosystem. There are different kinds of ecosystem like pond ecosystem, grassland ecosystem, forest ecosystem and other type of ecosystem found on the earth. And these ecosystem, they are present in the particular geographical location, and its overall impact will also, this biodiversity also says that the overall impact on human existence and the environment. Third type of biodiversity is genetic biodiversity. You know that genes, they are the smallest unit of storing information and they inherit from one generation to the other generation. Now individuals of same species, if we talk about the Homo sapiens, so individuals of this Homo sapiens species, they differ from each other in various characteristics like height, complexion, features, due to the variation in their genetic constitution. So genetic biodiversity is the variation of genes within the species. Our next topic is biodiversity at risk due to human activities. As we know that extinction or the disappearance of fauna and flora, it is a natural routine, natural phenomena, and there are various examples of mass extinction. Like very common example is dinosaur. Now in today's time, just because of the human activities, species and ecosystems, they are under threat, like they are in danger as never before. In this topic, we'll study the various human actions that lead to loss of biodiversity. First is overpopulation. Now, overpopulation, we know that human population is increasing day by day, and the loss of a species and ecosystem can be attributed to accelerating transformation of Earth due to growing human population. It means that just because of the overpopulation, because of the ever increasing demand of human population, human beings, this and the climate is changing like never before. Overpopulation is one of the factor behind the loss of biodiversity. Next is the overuse of resources. As we know that there are renewable and non-renewable resources, and the growing population consume more resources, and human beings have degraded and or you can say destroyed roughly half of the world forest just because of the ever increasing demand. So we have destroyed more than half of the world forest, and nowadays we are depleting fossil fuels, we are overusing the minerals, we are also overusing fresh water, and we are polluting our environment and over harvesting our ocean resources. And we can say that human beings are the major factor behind the disappearing of species and destruction of ecosystem. Next point is over hunting and poaching. Now hunting is, there is a difference between hunting and poaching. Poaching is the illegal hunting, and hunting is authorized by the government. These two are the significant cause of extinction and threatening, that is the destroying of number of species. Examples are tigers, rhinos, passenger pigeon, snowy erget. These are the few examples. Now next is the over habitat loss, degradation or fragmentation. These are the important cause of extinction, and every species has a specific food and habitat need, and when all the food and habitat needs are altered or destroyed, they are prone to extinction. Fauna and flora are prone to extinction. And not only this, deforestation, that is the destruction or the loss of forest or cutting of forest, is the major reason for habitat destruction. Now habitat destruction occurs due to the conversion of forest to other land like agriculture, infrastructure development, human settlement, dam, etc. Now next is the over harvesting. Now in this over harvesting, human, as you know that ever increasing population is using natural resources for food, medicine, for clothes, for other potential uses. Now this is another factor, followed by the invasion by a non-native species. What do you mean by non-native species? Now non-native species, basically native species are local to the particular area, and non-native species are introduced species, that is they are introduced from somewhere else. So non-native species, they compete for food and compete for other climatic factor with native species, and they also damage the native species. Next factor is pollution. You know the pollution is the major cause. Now in this section we'll study about the man super consumer. As we know that human beings are the biggest consumer on this earth, and impact of his action on the earth resources in three aspects like economic impact, ecological impact and aesthetic impact. Next, the world resources. We know that resources is used to describe the materials present in large quantities, and they are stored for future use. So if these resources occur in nature, they are called the natural resources. So we also know that natural resources are categorized into renewable resources and non-renewable resources. Now let me remind once again, renewable resources are water, soil, living organisms, because they have the capacity to renew or reproduce by themselves naturally. On the other hand, non-renewable resources, they have the limited quantity and they cannot renew or reproduce by themselves or naturally. Coal, petroleum, minerals, ores, these are the examples of non-renewable resources. Now in next section, we'll study the factors that lead to the depletion of resources. It means that what are the factors, what are the things that are responsible for the depletion of natural resources. Now first is the overuse or irrational use of resources. Overuse or irrational use means that just because of the greed of human beings leads to the overexploitation and overuse of the natural resources. Now let me give you one simple example, that overfishing leads to decline in fish resources. Similarly, continuous agriculture leads to decrease in soil fertility. Irrational use means not using our resources wisely and without wasting them. Now one common example, that using car to transport single individual is another, it's one of the example of wasting precious fossil fuel. Now a carpool or public transport can be an alternative option. Now next is the non-equitable distribution of resources. Now natural resources are not equally distributed throughout the world, throughout the countries. Hence there is an over-exploitation of the resources where it is found to supply them to the place where they are not found. It means that some areas or some countries where the natural resources are abundant, so they are over-exploiting. In some areas or some countries where they are not found in large quantities, so there is a non-equitable distribution or unequal distribution of resources. Now in addition, there lies cost of transportation of these resources to the place of demand. Third is the technological and industrial development. Now this is one of the factors that lead to the depletion of resources. Technological means the development in science and technology has led to the development of new product and establishment of more industries like fuel, water, land. And these industries not only deplete the natural resources but also contaminate the air, water and soil with the pollutants they release. Now next factor is the overpopulation. Overpopulation, as we know that human population is not increasing, it is multiplying. Unprecedented rise, that is the immense increase in population, is one of the most important cause of resource depletion, because rise in population increases the demand for food, shelter, clothing, water, electricity, transportation, healthcare, educational institutions, etc. The increase in demand of food leads to intensive cropping, and which again lead to the decrease in soil fertility and again lead to the conversion of forest into cropland. Now you can see there is a chain, like if there is an increase in population, so ultimately it will lead to the desertification. So these are the factors which are responsible for the depletion of resources. The major consequences of resource depletion, that is the results or the effects of resource depletion. Resource depletion adversely or negatively affect the ecological balance, because natural resources are interconnected. So impact created by one resource affects the human beings in numerous ways. Now let us study the results or the consequences. Now first consequence is imbalance in nature. Just because of the human activities like industrialization, transportation, mining and deforestation, the ecological balance has been disturbed. For example, now I'm giving one example. Increase in deforestation. Deforestation means the cutting of forest leads to an increase in the temperature and change in rainfall pattern, which further leads to the global warming. Now just because of the human activities like ever increasing industrialization, transportation, they also, all the changes, just because of the changes there is an imbalance in nature. Next is the shortage of materials. Now next consequence is the shortage of material. Now what do you mean by a shortage of material? Just because of the imbalance in nature, because of the ever increasing industrialization, now there is a shortage of material. Like you know that we have renewable and non-renewable resources, and nature takes its own time to reproduce its resources. Now depletion of resources causes shortage of material because of the urbanization, because of the overpopulation, industrialization, and the demand exceeds the supply. There is a lot of demand, but the supply is limited. Now let's take an interesting example of soil formation, which is a very slow process. 1 inch of soil is formed in about 200 to 1000 years. Now you can imagine. Now fossil fuels like coal, oil, etc., they take millions of years to form. There are so many examples related to the shortage of material because of the over exploitation of natural resources. As a result of growing demand, there is a shortage of materials. Next consequence of resource depletion is the struggle for existence. There would be a struggle between human beings and animals for the available resources, because we have limited resources and demand is very high. Most of the time human beings win, obviously. They destroy the natural habitats of the species living there, and they may become extinct. So just because of the struggle between human beings and other animals, human beings, they used to destroy the natural habitats. Next is the slacking of economic growth. Slacking, or the losing or the reduction in economic growth. Economic growth of a country is dependent on the amount of resources it has. More the amount of resources, more is the number of goods in country can produce and export, leading to an increase in the economic growth. Now in countries like our country India, which are overpopulated, there is overconsumption of resources for satisfying the need. So we have learned that we have the culture of throwaway. So this is human society is also known as the throwaway society. So therefore only a little is left for export, thereby causing the slackening of economic growth. Come to the other effects related to the depletion of resources. Removal of topsoil. We know that topsoil is a very fertile layer, and it is very important for the agricultural productivity and growth of vegetation. So topsoil are removed due to the deforestation, because of the faulty agricultural practices, because of the soil erosion. Removal of topsoil is related to the depletion of resources. Next is the deforestation. Deforestation, as you know, that results in rise in temperature, less rainfall due to the less transpiration, the soil erosion, so a loss of habitat. These are the examples of associated with deforestation. Loss of habitat for large number of species of fauna and flora. Desertification. Now desertification is it is a desert-like condition. It is created just because of the soil pollution, soil erosion, intensive or faulty agriculture practice, salinization. So there is no scope of growth for of any vegetation on such land. It's because of the desertification. Next is the depletion of groundwater. Groundwater are very important, and it is a source of drinking water for the cities. There is no water reservoir or water bodies nearby. Now this water fills up the space in the aquifer. We know that groundwater is contaminated because of the pollution, and the level of groundwater is going deep is because of the industrialization, mining activities, and there is also a danger of caving in the ground due to the vacuum created by the depletion of water. Impact of human action on the earth's resources. We have already covered this topic under the heading biodiversity at risk due to human actions. If you recall this topic, we had already covered the points like overpopulation, overuse of resources, overhunting and poaching, habitat loss, degradation, fragmentation, over-harvesting, invasion by the non-native species. Invasion means the introduction of the non-native species, and pollution, climate change. Now move further. Next topic is reasons for concern, that is in importance of biodiversity. So here we'll discuss in detail the importance of biodiversity under three main categories, or you can say the three main concern. First is the ecological concern, second is the aesthetic concern, and third is the economical concern. Let us move further. Here we will discuss all these headings in detail. First is ecological reasons or the ecological importance of biodiversity. How biodiversity is important as far as ecological concern. First is the production, as you can see. Now children, you know that green plants are the sole source of food material on this earth. They produce food by the process of photosynthesis, and they also initiate or they also start the food chain. I think you know food chain, there are three components: producers, consumer and decomposers. Second point of ecological reason is consumption. Children, you know that herbivores, they consume plants because plants are the sole source of food on this earth, and carnivores, they consume animals for food. So in this category, in the consumer categories, there are primary, secondary and tertiary consumers. So small consumers, they are eaten or the feed by the big animals for food in this process of consumption, which is very helpful in running of food chain and maintaining ecological balance. Next is the decomposition. You know that all microorganisms or saprophytes, they are decomposers. Since they decompose the dead plants, animals, they return the nutrients back to the soil. They degrade the dead plants and animals, they also return the nutrients present in dead plants and animals back to the soil. So the next component is soil formation. After decomposition, after the decomposition of microorganisms, dead plants and animals, they form humus. Humus, basically it is a substance made from dead leaves and plants. Humus is very rich in nutrient, and it is also rich in nitrogen. Also roots of the trees and plants help in soil formation. Control of erosion. Erosion means the soil erosion. Soil erosion is the loss of top or fertile layer, which is very important for the agriculture purpose. So plants, with the help of their roots, they bind the soil, they fix the soil and control soil erosion. Next is the reduction of pollution. Plants, they purify air. Basically during the process of photosynthesis, they convert carbon dioxide into oxygen. I think you just recall the process of photosynthesis, where plants used to take carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and water from their roots, and they convert CO2 and water into oxygen. Now microbes or microorganisms also help to degrade pollutants. Basically pollutants are the substances responsible for pollution. The next or last point is nitrogen fixation. Microorganisms like rhizobium help to fix atmospheric nitrogen, and they enhance the soil in nitrogen, increase fertility. Let me add one more thing, that the atmosphere is the biggest reservoir of nitrogen, and plants cannot utilize atmospheric nitrogen. So it is the microorganisms like rhizobium, Anabaena nostoc, they used to convert the atmospheric nitrogen into nitrate or nitrite form, which is very convenient for plants to take. Next importance is the aesthetic importance of biodiversity. Since each species and ecosystem adds to the richness and beauty of life on earth, aesthetic means the beauty of nature, and this beauty enhance, or it is a representation of our values, and this value is again appear through our actions. Let me sum all the three things, like richness and beauty. They enhance our values, and altogether they increase the aesthetic value of biodiversity. Now let me give one example. Aesthetic value of biodiversity means different fauna and flora found on the earth, they increase the beauty. For example, biodiversity hotspots. Hotspot means biodiversity rich areas. They are very good source of revenue, as well as they are the good spot for tourism, recreation, and they also attract people or the tourists to come for wildlife photography, camping, bird watching, and other activities which are based on nature. In a nutshell, we can say that biodiversity also enhance the aesthetic value, and it also increase revenue sources and also increase the beauty, also attract tourism. Next is the economical importance of biodiversity. In this section, we'll learn how biodiversity is important as far as economical aspect is concerned. Now, food. First is the food. As we know that food is an important commodity provided by biodiversity, and both animals and plants product are utilized by human beings as a food material. Next is the medicine. Various plants and animals are the source of medicine. A very common example is penicillin. Penicillin is a very good antibiotic, very common antibiotic. It is derived from fungus, and the name of the fungus is Penicillium notatum. Next is the industry. Biodiversity provides variety of raw material. Raw material means the starting material or the crude material for industries like paper industry, cotton industry, rubber industry, timber industry. Next, economical importance is in the sector of tourism and recreation. So it also enhance the aesthetic value. It also attract tourists and people for various activities related to the nature, and this type of economical concern also increase the revenue and generate employment. Next is the marine products. Marine product means related to the ocean, and since India has a rich marine biodiversity. Marine biodiversity means we have a variety of fauna and flora inside the sea, at the deep sea. So marine products, they have a great value in terms of food, medicines, and minerals. We can say that biodiversity also enhance our economy. We'll discuss the conservation of our genetic resources under 3 points. First is to preserve biodiversity, the meaning of conservation in such a way, utilization of resources in such a way that they are not destroyed completely and can be further utilized by the future generation. In modern days, there are 3 objectives of conservation. First is preserve biodiversity, because we know that the importance of biodiversity is very important for sustainable life. Second is to maintain essential ecological processes and life support system. And the third one is ensure sustainable utilization of species and ecosystem. It means that when we conserve our genetic resource, it means we are ensuring our future generation, we are ensuring a sustainable utilization of species and ecosystem. So these 3 are the main points under the conserving our genetic resources. Now next is conserving our genetic resources. Our main concept comes here, in situ and ex situ conservation. Before we go into detail, let me tell you something about the in situ and ex situ. In situ and ex situ is it is a Latin word. Situ means the place. In situ means the conservation inside their own habitat or the native place, and ex situ means the conservation of fauna and flora outside their natural habitat. In situ means conservation of fauna and flora inside their natural habitat, and the opposite is ex situ, where conservation occurs outside the natural habitat. These 2 are the strategies to conserve our biodiversity. The fundamental objective of genetic resource conservation is the maintenance of broad-based genetic diversity within each of the species, that is, intraspecific genetic diversity. with a known or potential value in order to ensure availability for exploitation by present and future generation. In situ conservation means conservation of wildlife in its natural surroundings or in its natural habitat. It ensures protection of the ecosystem of the original habitat and includes protected areas like national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, and biosphere reserves. Ex-situ conservation refers to the protection of the species outside their natural habitats in artificial conditions under human care. Examples are botanical garden, zoo, aquarium, parks, agricultural research centers, gene banks, tissue culture, and DNA banks. Now, wildlife protected areas, that is in situ conservation. So, what are the objectives? The objectives of all the protected areas, whether a national park, wildlife sanctuaries, or biosphere reserves, are common. They are protection of natural habitat through controlled, limited use of species. Second, maintenance of viable number of species. Third is establishment and protection of species through legislation for the conservation of wildlife. Fourth is educating the public for wildlife protection. And the fifth point is conducting research in specific areas of wildlife. Now coming to the first example of in situ conservation method is national park. So national park is an area set aside by the government strictly for the betterment of the wildlife. Human activities like forestry, grazing or agriculture is not permitted. Example, Jim Corbett National Park in Uttaranchal is famous for tigers, elephants, leopards and many species of deer. Kaziranga National Park in Assam is famous for rhinoceros, Indian bison, swamp deer, pygmy hawk. Sundarban National Park in West Bengal is famous for Bengal tigers. Kanha National Park in Madhya Pradesh is famous for tigers, Barasingha, deer. Second example of in situ conservation method is wildlife sanctuary. It is a protected area that is reserved for the conservation only of wildlife, that is plants and animal species. Human activities like harvesting of timber, collection of minor forest products, and private ownership rights are allowed. Bharatpur Bird Sanctuary in Rajasthan also attracts migratory birds in winter. Gir Lion Sanctuary in Gujarat is famous for Asiatic lions. Kedarnath Sanctuary is famous for brown antler deer. Third example is Biosphere Reserve. It is a special category of protected area of land or coastal environment which aims at conservation of ecosystems and genetic resources contained in them. Multiple land use is permitted by designating various zones, and these zones are natural or core zone, which is the innermost zone where no human activity is allowed and it is legally protected. Second zone is the buffer zone. This is the middle zone of resource use strategies where limited human activities are allowed. The third zone of biosphere reserve is transition zone, which is the outermost area of active cooperation between management and the local people. In this zone, activities like settlements, cropping, forestry, recreation and economic uses are allowed and in harmony with conservation goals. Captive breeding, which is ex-situ conservation strategy, and it refers to breeding of animals that are endangered in restricted or captive areas such as zoo, aquariums, research centers. For example, the Nandankanan Zoological Park in Odisha is famous for captive breeding of white tigers and gharial. Advantages of captive breeding: it helps in conserving rare and endangered species. It helps in reintroduction of species in their natural habitat where their number is less. It provides necessary conditions for breeding of animals when their habitat is destroyed, altered, or affected by diseases. It helps in preserving the gene pool to avoid problems of inbreeding. It protects the carrying mother and offspring from predators and natural calamities. UNESCO, which is very common, that is United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. Its aim is to building peace, education and eradication of poverty and sustainable development. Second is the MAB, that is Man and Biosphere. It is intergovernmental scientific program launched by the UNESCO, and its main aim is to establish a scientific basis for important relationship between human beings and their environment. IUCN, that is International Union for Conservation of Nature, Natural Resources. This is working in the field of natural conservation and sustainable use of natural resources. WCU, that is World Conservation Union, again it is renamed as the IUCN in 2008. CITES, CITES, that is Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Flora and Fauna. FSI, that is Forest Survey of India, involved in the studies and research to monitor the changing situation of land and forest resources